everyone, it's Amy from raisingarrows.net, and I am here to help you with your large family homemaking and homeschooling. So today I am going to share with you a few things about what's going on in our family, and also share with you about homeschooling gaps and why gaps are actually a really great opportunity for your children rather than something for you to stress about. So first of all, things going on here. We got some big major stuff. I am going to become a mother-in-law. I can hardly believe it because in my mind, I'm like 23, but actually it's my son who's 23, and he is getting married in 2022 to a lovely young lady. We really, really like her. So we're excited about that. That's kind of crazy new for us, something that we've never been through. So we're gonna change seasons again. My youngest is 5, and like I said, my oldest is 23, and then we have all the ages in between. We still have 7 kids here at home full time. Our 20-year-old is away at college, but she comes back on breaks. She is studying American Sign Language interpreting, which many of you probably knew that if you read the blog. There's some different articles there about homeschooling classes for American Sign Language and parenting your child's passions through your homeschool. And I've talked about that extensively over the years because this is something she's actually been interested for a long time. And so, yeah, that's what's going on here. And things have been kind of busy. That's the reason I haven't put out any videos. However, I now have my 15-year-old son editing videos, and so I'm really hopeful that I can get out some more as he helps me with those videos, because that's the most time consuming for me, is actually editing the video and doing the notes are really no big deal, but there's just a lot that goes into that. And with the podcast and the blog still going strong, sometimes it's just one more thing to do. However, I really enjoy the venue of video. I think that it's a whole other dynamic, and it's something that I think can definitely contribute to the blog. It's just been hard for me to do. So hopefully with him helping out with that, then it won't be quite so much for me to do. So on to the homeschooling gaps. I have an article on the blog. It's entitled "Why Homeschool Gaps Aren't Mistakes," and that's what I'm going to be referencing here. If you see me look down, that's me looking at my notes from the actual post. I wrote this post a few years back because I was hearing homeschool moms talk about how they're just afraid of gaps in their child's education. And I would also hear from moms who had maybe put their children back into public school and they were just totally stressed over the fact that their homeschooled child, when they went back to public school, had gaps in their education, and how awful that was, and how they just were so embarrassed and frustrated by it. And I got to thinking over this, and I realized, if you think back to your own education, I'm pretty sure we all had gaps, and most of us were government schooled. And so we stress about them as homeschool moms because we're the primary teachers. And we also hear a lot from the outside world saying, you're not qualified. How can you possibly teach them everything they need to know? And you end up feeling like you just maybe can't do this, and there's going to be all these gaps in your child's education and they'll never recover from that. Well, I'm here to tell you today that absolutely they can recover from that, and actually gaps are not the bad thing that you think they are. So first of all, I know from the get-go that you're going to be stressed about those gaps. It's what we usually think about when we think about being a homeschool mom. We think about all the subjects we need to teach, and sometimes there's way more subjects on our list of things we think we need to teach than what we actually need to teach. So we kind of already set ourselves up for failure. But we look at this like laundry list of things we've got to teach our kindergartner, our first grader, or so on and so forth. And we get a little freaked out, especially when they get to like middle school and high school. We really have a freak out moment because the list gets huge. And then we're thinking, wait, this is upper level math. This is upper level science. This is stuff that I don't feel equipped to teach and handle. And maybe somebody else needs to do that. And quite possibly, yes, somebody else may need to do that. You may need to outsource that to a program that can actually do that for you. But what I want you to do first is take a big deep breath and allow yourself, especially if you're a first-time homeschool mom, allow yourself a while to adjust. I call it the 3-year learning curve because it takes about 3 years to get from freak out mode to, okay, I can do this. And then sometimes there's another freak out mode, like I said, at middle school and high school, and you're thinking, can I really do this? And then you don't really have 3 years to calm yourself down. But if you've been homeschooling during that time, the calm down period is going to be a lot faster. But that 3-year learning curve is where you're trying to figure out your style. You're trying to figure out your children's learning abilities and methods and the ways that they learn and understand information. You're trying to figure out what works and doesn't work in your homeschool. And you're also learning to detox from an in-the-box education where you feel like everything has to look like the public school, and it's very difficult for you to think outside that box and realize that your children can still be educated outside of the public school paradigm. And that's something that just takes about 3 years for you to become confident in. And during those 3 years, you're learning more and more about yourself. You're learning more and more about your children. You're learning more and more about what the Lord wants you to do in your homeschool. And you are becoming more familiar with homeschooling and how that can be done for God's glory and in a way that is educationally sound without necessarily looking like a public school system. So it kind of takes about 3 years, I guess, to climb out of the box and then be comfortable in the skin you're in. So give yourself some grace there. And then recognize that that laundry list of subjects you wrote down is probably not all subjects you need to be doing. If you take my Creating a Homeschool Schedule You Love class, you will work through that laundry list of subjects and learn what's important, what's not, and then how to fit all of that stuff in. And I'll just give you a little hint here. You won't necessarily fit all of that stuff in all of the time. You have to be reasonable. And so you'll start to see that as you take that class and learn to create a schedule that fits in the subjects that you deem to be important. So check that out. That'll be in the show notes. That's Creating a Homeschool Schedule You Love. You can also get to it from my shop at raisingarrows.net/shop. Okay, so even after you've gone through this 3-year learning curve and you're pretty comfortable in your homeschooling, you're still going to see gaps or feel like there's going to be gaps or there are gaps. And I want to share with you the truth of those gaps so that you see them for what they really are, not what you believe them to be. So first of all, no teacher can cover everything. I don't care whether that teacher is a homeschool teacher, a public school teacher, a private school teacher, or a college professor. No teacher can cover everything. It is not possible. And honestly, if you look at this from an objective standpoint, there are 2 gaps that we see. We see gaps that we think the public school can fill, but we also see gaps that we think other homeschoolers can fill that we somehow are not able to. We worry that we aren't teaching math or science or composition the way that the public school does, and therefore our child is always going to be behind. They're not going to make it into college. They're not going to be able to get a job because we didn't teach them the ways of the public school and the way that the public school teaches the kids who go to public school. So we're either remembering our public school education with rose-colored glasses. Oh, and sorry about the change in the light. You're just gonna have to bear with me here. I am using the sunlight from outside, and a cloud just went over the sun and it's gorgeous, but it definitely changed the lighting. So, oh, here we go again. Anyway, bear with me on this. Thanks I appreciate you guys bearing with me. But, okay, so we either remember our own public school education with these rose-colored glasses, or we have people in our lives who are forcing that concern on us. A lot of times this is grandparents, aunts and uncles, it's family members, a lot of times, who remember their own public school education with rose-colored glasses, and so they are afraid for you. They're concerned for you, and they are just worried that your child's not getting a good enough education, their grandchild is not getting a good enough education. So recognize that it's concern most of the time. It's not necessarily a judgment on you, it's concern for their grandchildren or concern for you. And then as far as the gaps that we see that we might be having that other homeschool moms are not having, that's typically a social media homeschool group mom kind of thing, where we are looking outside of ourselves and we're seeing the best of the best. We're seeing this Instagram washed, beautiful educational experience, and we're thinking, why can I not manage that? I spent a lot of years that way, thinking, what am I missing? I do not have enough hours in the day to do these beautiful projects, and maybe I just have too many kids, or maybe I just have too many responsibilities, or maybe if I cut something out of my life, then I would have more time to do these really awesome projects that I'm seeing people do on Instagram. And it's sort of that fear of missing out, fear that your child is missing out. And it honestly might even be a little bit of jealousy as well. We're pretty sure that they take nature walks every day, and we're pretty sure that they teach Latin and calculus every day, and we're pretty sure that they are doing all the fun projects and all the fun mom things, and we are not. And in that process, all we can see are our own gaps. And it just seems like we are living a hot mess and they're living an Instagram worthy life, and how in the world are they doing it? And I'm just totally messing it up. Okay, but here's the thing. If we really took a step back and paid attention to the reality, we would see that every single teacher out there, no matter what they're teaching and where they're teaching, cannot possibly teach everything. And if teachers were merited based on whether or not they had gaps, there would not be a single teacher in the world who would still have a job, because there is no way to teach everything to everybody. You do your very best, but there are still going to be gaps, and it doesn't matter if you're a homeschool mom or your public school teacher. It just doesn't matter. And those homeschool moms that you're seeing doing all the things, they're not doing all the things. You're only seeing the best and the brightest of what they're doing. You're not seeing the colossal failures that they're not showing on Instagram. People don't share that stuff. So anyway, just know that no teacher can cover everything. All right, number 2, a love of learning, not a spoon-fed education, is your goal here. So you want your children to love learning. You don't want to just spoon feed them facts and figures and ask them to regurgitate those facts and figures. That's not an education. That is just, a recycling of knowledge and then losing it. Usually it's not wisdom, and it doesn't usually end up retained very well. I mean, think about your own education and the things that you retained. Were they facts and figures, or were they events and stories and information? And then think about this. If you were interested in a subject, and even now, if you're interested in a subject, how much time do you spend invested in researching and finding information about that subject? I bet you spend lots and lots and lots of energy on that because you are interested in it. You want to learn more about it. And that is what we're going for. We're going for a love of learning. We're going for teaching our children to love learning, love education, and then also to know how to find the resources and the information on their own. And that is going to take you teaching them how to work independently. And it's also going to take actually having gaps. Because if you have spoon-fed every little piece of information to them, they will never go looking for their own information. It's kind of like the sign in Yellowstone that says, don't feed the bears, or the bears won't feed themselves, something along those lines. If you're constantly spoon feeding your children information, they're not even going to realize they can actually go get the information for themselves. And that is something we're actually seeing in colleges these days. I have had 2 children go through college. One has graduated and one is currently in college. And the interesting thing about the stories that they would come home with is that so many of the students, most of them government schooled, had to have everything spoon-fed to them. It had to be, here are the exact answers that are going to be on the test. And here are all the things that we're going to cover. And if you don't have enough time to finish, then we'll give you extra time. And it's very dumbed down. I hate to say that, but it's very dumbed down, especially since I was in college, and that hasn't been that long ago. But I wonder what like my dad would say about, his college experience versus what we're seeing now in the colleges. It is just a very dumbed down educational experience that is spoon fed. There's very little room for intellectual conversations, for differing opinions and views, and for a deciphering of information and a digging for information. People just do not seem to know how to dig for information anymore. We take what is told to us at face value, and we don't ever ask questions and dig deeper and look to see if there's inconsistencies or if there's a different way to do it. We're not very innovative, I guess. And that's what we're seeing in the college campuses is just there's a big lack of innovation and new ideas and people who are willing to question the establishment and use logic, not feelings. It's a lot of feelings. I have a podcast about that, by the way. I will link that in the show notes where I talk about preparing your children for the adult world, because we can't use the logic that we think we should be able to use because everybody's operating on feelings these days. But it's still important that our kids have an understanding of logic and reality and the way that we use those and to operate within the world. And so that's a podcast that is definitely worth listening to, especially if you have kids who are on the cusp of graduating. So anyway, that's what I want for my kids, is to have a love of learning and to be able to dig for information. And a lot of times that digging for information happens because there are gaps and they need to look for the information that fills the gaps. I don't know if you guys can hear the wind chimes outside my window. I have my window closed, but the wind chimes are going and they're just absolutely beautiful. I love those wind chimes so much. They're Corinthian bells, for those of you who wonder. But if you hear this lovely dinging in the background, those are my my wind chimes on my back deck. I will take them off for winter, but right now I just can't bear to part with them quite yet, so I keep hanging on to them. But it's definitely getting more and more breezy out, and so anyway, that's what you're hearing. Enjoy. Okay, so the third point I want to make about gaps is that you aren't perfect. And this goes along with the idea that no teacher can cover everything, but you aren't perfect. But guess who is? God is. And so you need to recognize, and homeschooling is a fantastic opportunity for this. You need to recognize that you need a savior and you are just not it. And you are going to be on your knees a lot, and there's going to be a lot of under your breath whispered prayers while you homeschool, because you're not perfect, but God is. And so those gaps and those imperfections and those issues that arise, God's got those covered. He's not surprised by them. And if he called you to this, he's going to equip you for this. It's going to be hard. And there's going to be times when you are definitely going to need help, but it also keeps you humble and helps you to see that you do need a savior and your children need a savior. And this is more important than any addition, subtraction, science type thing, is understanding our need for a savior and recognizing that and falling on our knees daily in front of God for prayer and supplication and worship. All right, and then my last point I want to make, and I've kind of been making this all throughout this conversation, is that what if your gaps were actually gates? What if they were opportunities? What if they were a chance for your child to walk through a problem and search out the answer for themselves? What if it's an opportunity for them to become more independent, more responsible, more grown up? Because I tell people this all the time. I'm not raising children. I'm raising adults. I'm raising arrows. And so in that process, whenever there's a gap and a hardship and something that maybe they don't understand, that's an opportunity to grow and learn and to become more responsible and to understand more about the world around them. It's an opportunity, it's a gate for them to walk through. So I'm going to tell you a real quick story of my own, about my own gap that became a gate. And this involves my third year in college. I had transferred to a four-year private university. I had taken several classes in high school, so I had about 24 college credits when I graduated high school. I think some of those were comp. Yeah, they were composition. That I was taught by a high school teacher, and then I went on to a four-year for a semester, and then I moved down where my future husband was at playing football, and that was a community college. And so I finished out my associates there, he and I did, and then we moved up to this four-year private university, and I was in the English department, and I was writing my papers like I had always written my papers. And my English professor, who also happened to be my advisor, called me into her office one day, and she said, "Who taught you to write like this?" She said, "You are a better writer than this." And she goes, "I am confounded by your writing." And I explained to her that I was taught a method by my high school English teacher. And the method was, this is how you write a thesis paragraph, and this is how you write a thesis sentence, and this is how you write the rest of your paper. And she said, "No, that is not how you do it." And here I am, a junior in college, and I have somehow managed to get through college without writing a proper paper in her mind. And I'm sitting there thinking, oh, great. I am going to fail my last 2 years in college, because now is when I'm going to be writing all the papers because I'm an English major. What am I going to do? And she took that afternoon and she lined out for me a proper way to write thesis paragraphs, thesis statements, and papers. And I learned in an afternoon everything I needed to know to properly write a paper. And it was one afternoon. Homeschool moms tend to spend years stressing about essays and research papers. Well, guess what? You can learn it in an afternoon, because I did. You don't necessarily have to have it all right all the time. If your kids go to college, they're going to learn things in college. If they do not go to college, they're going to learn things out in the real world. They are going to have gaps. Let them have gaps, and then recognize that those gaps are an opportunity for them to learn and grow. And that was what that gap was for me. I had a gap, and I was an English major. I had a gap in writing essays and research papers. I mean, that's a pretty colossal gap when you consider what my major was. And yet, in one afternoon, I was taught how to fix that because somebody sat down and taught it to me. And that is one other point I want to make that I didn't put in the post. And something that I have always taught my kids, because it was taught to me by my parents, was when your child is struggling, go to the professor, go to a tutor, go to somebody who can help you and help you understand what it is you need to do. Don't wait until it is a colossal failure. My parents always encouraged me to go to a teacher if I was struggling in the class. I have always encouraged my college students to go to the professor if they're struggling in a class. Professors and teachers and tutors and parents, we all like to know whether you're struggling or not and what you need help with. We can't help you if we don't know what you're struggling with. And so I have always encouraged my kids to make sure that if they have issues, they go and talk to the person who can help them. That may even be a pastor. If they're having issues in church and they're not understanding something and they've come to us, they also probably need to go to the pastor and ask their questions there and get some answers. I want my kids to ask questions. And honestly, the only way they're going to get to that point where they ask those questions is if they haven't been spoon-fed the information and there are gaps and they have a love of learning enough to go seek out the answers to those gaps. So there you have it. A long-winded conversation about homeschooling gaps, but I think it's a super important conversation to have because we do all stress about those gaps. So hopefully this will help you stress a little less and see those gaps for what they are, their opportunities and their gateways. Until next time, I hope you will check out some other videos on this channel. I typically talk about large family homemaking and homeschooling. And like I said, I am hoping to be here a lot more often now that my 15-year-old is editing some videos. But I appreciate you guys so much. Go and check out raisingarrows.net for all of your large family homemaking and homeschooling needs. See you next time.